Welcome to our session on water governance concepts, methods and practices. My name is Margaret Degno. I'm Senior Publishing Editor at Spring in Nature and working in the Geography and Sustainability Research Group. Just before we move on, I also introduce my colleague Doris Blyer, who's kind enough today to help us out with the technical issues and managing the slides and the session together. I'd like to just introduce you to our editorial team, tell you a little bit about the book programme that we're involved with, talk in general a little bit about book publishing with Springer, some of the things that are involved. And then we'll move on to the second part of the session, which will be presented by Claudia, Pahl-Wostl and Joyeeta Gupta. They will talk about the book series Water Governance and also their ideas on water governance, the series and the future of the same. And like I said, we will have time for questions and comments at the end of the session. Thank you. Okay, so this is our team, Geography and Sustainability Research. The team lead is Robert Doe. He's based in the Georgette office with Juliana Pitangi, Doris and myself. And we have two further colleagues, Zach Romano and Aaron Schiller, both based in the New York office. Thank you. The team, as a group, we publish on a number of topics. You can see this on the bottom half of the screen, Earth Sciences, Geography, Sustainability Research, and the Water Programme, which is part of my portfolio, and something we'll be concentrating on today in this session. Within the group and Springer Nature in general, we publish different types of books. I've listed a few here. Monographs, edited volumes, textbooks, handbooks, and all of these book types are available in both print and ebooks. The ebooks are brought together in collections or packages and made available through institutional and university libraries, so thereby making the e-content accessible at a global level. All the book types are also available to be published as open access, and we are one of the leaders with digital publishing, and we published our 1,000, difficult to say, 1,000 open access book in May 2020. So I think this is a great way of disseminating and increasing the readability of research. And of course, an important point there is that authors retain the copyright to their work, publishing through open access. Next slide, please. Okay, so why would you want to publish a book? Well, there are, of course, a number of reasons, and just wanted to touch on a couple of points here today. Publishing will perhaps help you connect or reconnect with your community. Perhaps your research is scattered over different journal articles, maybe with journals from different publishing houses. So this is a way of consolidating your research, bringing it back to one place, having everything in a book, connecting again with the community in that way, and also perhaps in another way by publishing with colleagues from different disciplines in an interdisciplinary way, and broadening your network and connecting with a wider community. This, of course, will help build on your reputation, highlight you as a scholar and a researcher, and also secondary to that, of course, it may give some insights into how you would manage a project, and I've often heard it quite difficult, of course, to manage a group of chapter authors bringing together a contributed volume. It's been referred to as herding cats, so showing some managerial skills there as well. And of course, accelerating your career or enhancing your career. We're all very aware these days of the metrics that are available, citations, H-index, and Google Scholar play an important role. And so having a published book on your CV is no bad thing, of course. The next slide, please. Okay, so if you decide, you're interested in sending a book proposal to Springer for consideration, there are certainly some things to bear in mind. Importantly, of course, is to provide a concise summary of what your book will be about. What are you going to deal with? Who is your audience? What are the benefits of your book? Will this fill a gap in the market or in the already existing literature? Who are you writing the book for? Who's your intended audience? Will it be the professional market, or are you aiming for a group of students? When you make a proposal, a title is also very important, considering the search engine optimization, making your book much more findable on social media and on internet searches. Also, putting together a concise table of contents will help you structure the book. What we're less in favour of is just a collection of chapters loosely brought together, loosely related with a topic. We would like to see books that are solid projects with a beginning and an end that makes sense, that is something that you would like to read, so that's very important. And if you're considering a contributed or edited volume, then it's a good idea to provide the names and affiliations of contributors and some background information to orient these contributors. So perhaps a CV or a list of recent publications would be helpful to give some insights there. And importantly for yourself is a realistic timeline. We're very aware of the fact that big projects are written next to other commitments you may have, like a paid job or family, of course. So a realistic timeline will help you reach your goals in a much more achievable and comfortable way, I think. Next slide, thanks, Charles. Okay, a lot of information on this slide actually, but I just want to take you through the process a little bit once a proposal has been submitted to Springer. Of course, it will be considered and evaluated by the series editors. They may also decide to use some external reviewers to help them in this process. And based on the results of that, the project will be accepted for Springer, and we will arrange a formal contract. At the same time, a package is sent out to the authors. This includes some instructions and templates to help you prepare a manuscript, and also some guidelines to offer advice on things like obtaining third-party permissions and how to format and lay out your manuscript. Once the manuscript is ready for submission, you will be sent a link, a secure link to an FTP, a Springer FTP website, and here you're able to upload your manuscript, which again may be sent out for a second round of peer review. There will be an opportunity to make the revision and then resubmit the revised manuscript to Springer. We will then complete the data finalization, make sure that we have everything we need before we move the project to the formal acceptance into the production process. There's one more step just before, after that process and before publication, and that's when e-proofs are made available to chapter authors and book editors, authors, which allows them to make any minor corrections before the final files are created. So then we have the next slide. Okay, so having said all of that, the book then is published. As I mentioned earlier, we have the different formats. So there's the traditional print hardback volume that we're all familiar with. There's the ebook, which is permanently hosted and available through Springer Link. The ebooks can be downloaded and read on any handheld device, so they're very compatible. And then there's a third format, which is called My Copy. And the My Copies are black and white, soft-bound books. They're available through institutional or institutional university libraries. And the idea basically behind this is maybe a student or researcher might just want to have a printed copy of the book, maybe just to keep in their bag, or perhaps to take out into the field with them when they're going out for research. So that really is the end of my part of the presentation. If we could just go to the next slide, Doris. This is just a piece of the description of the book series, Water Governance Concepts, Methods and Practice. You can see the series cover here on the right-hand side, and the link to the series webpage below, which has a list of the titles published so far. And on the next slide, I would just like to introduce you now to our series editors. Thanks very much to both of you today for taking the time to talk about the series and give us your thoughts. Claudia Pahl-Wostl is a professor of resource management at the Institute of Geography and director of Research Center Institute for Environmental System Research at the University of Osnabrück, Germany. He is an internationally leading scholar on governance and adaptive and integrated management of water resources in the role of social and societal learning. Joyeeta Gupta is a full professor of environment and development in the Global South at Amsterdam Institute for Social Science Research, University of Amsterdam, and the Delft Institute of Water Education. Joyeeta is also a faculty professor on sustainability and leads the program group on governance and inclusive development. So, thank you both, and I'll now hand over to you to tell us more about the series and how you'd like to see this develop. Thank you.
I think I need to unmute, otherwise you can say. Thank you very much for this great introduction. I don't know whether Joyeeta has found her voice or connected her voice that we can hear.
I don't know. Can you hear me?
You great. Oh, perfect. So now you can enjoy the voice of both of us, not only seeing us. So very nice for this introduction. And it's a pleasure for us to really today to also share with you some thoughts on this book series and find perhaps some people who might be interested to provide some contributions. And why such another series? In general, there is another, I would say, water governance is still a research field that is establishing. It's already starts to get established, but still quite young. And we wanted also to support a book series that has a high scholarly ambition, not only edited books with a collection of independent chapters. I think there is another book series, more water policies, which is very much more to the applied field. That is a water policy that is here also with Springer, but this series really aims to make scholarly contribution. That's why it's either monographs, or if it's the edited volumes, they should definitely more coherently address one theme. That's the idea behind this book series. Yeah, and regarding slides, I'm not sure, did you include my slides as well or not? So I'm not yet, because I've prepared a few slides, which I could either share if this is possible, because I don't think that they're included in this presentation yet, are they?
I don't think so. Margaret, can you confirm?
You may have included the ones, so that's why I can share them if I know how they are shared. Let me just try.
We have some slides. Claudia?
Sorry?
I think that Claudia did send some slides today, earlier.
I sent some slides, but yeah, I just need to know.
I can make you presenter though, Claudia. There you go. And then below the icon with your microphone and your camera, you should have a third icon that looks like a TV, and that's how you can share your screen there.
Wait a second, I just need to open this now. Okay, good. All right. Good. So, what do I want to share? PowerPoint. Okay. All right. Do you see something now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is now I have only one screen, so at the moment normally I work with 2 screens. Now I only don't see anymore what you see. I only see my presentation. Okay, it seems to work. Yeah. Let me move this. Okay, I just collected here a few persistent governance challenges where at least you consider that these are still challenges both from the policy side, but also challenges that need to be addressed. Still, they have been, but need still to be addressed in more depth from the research community. Still huge coordination gaps, and just in the water field where we have always to deal with so cross-sectoral and cross-spatial issues, so both horizontal and vertical coordination are still a big and open issue, and there are still also a big problem and puzzle in policy. No integrated approach to water management is yet implemented due to a whole range of issues related to coordination. That different power structures is also another issue. The water energy food nexus has been promoted to overcome this, but it still persists. Related to this is really, we have a lot of ideas for policies, for regulatory frameworks, and often they exist on paper, or they not only exist on paper, but they are put in force on paper. But there are huge implementation deficits, and not only in countries with poor institutional capacity. Also in countries in Europe, implementation is often not satisfactory. And here also understanding, really linking really these various steps from policy development to why do we get these big implementation deficits and how they can be overcome. That's still a big issue to be addressed. And also poor capacity to respond. That's more important than ever now with climate change. Just the more recent climate change report disappeared, a bit at least in Europe, but I think everywhere in the world behind the news from the war. But it is daunting, and that is very, very, very critically important that we finally move on, think about how to better implement adaptive management, and also here more scholarly work could and should contribute. And related to this, still we see very low capacity to learn and transform. My terminology is single rather than triple loop learning. Try to improve what you've always been doing, relate more on established recipes rather than really supporting transformative change. These are issues that persist. They are not novel, but they persist, and I think they are both a challenge for policy, for science, and for policy. I still have then a few recommendations on topics to be addressed, and Joyeeta has also a couple, quite a few. Just to give you a summary, these are the papers, the books that have already been published in this series, partly already addressing the kind of topics I just mentioned. So my book on water governance in the face of global change had initiated this series. Then we have adaptive governance of disaster, droughts and floods, from flood safety to spatial management, twice more extreme events that have been discussed, but also corporations as custodians of the public good, more from a global perspective. That was really interesting to look at the intersection of corporate water stewardship and global water governance, European water law and hydropolitics, and the most recent that seems not yet to have very, let's say, a high quality cover picture on the webpage, because it's published just this year on governing groundwater. So I see a various range of topics that have already been addressed, mainly monographs, but there is still quite a bit of scope for adding further topics. There's still much more that could be explored. I have a few thoughts where I feel that this would be definitely of interest to get more contributions. Anticipatory governance, just what I said before, to build this capacity for anticipation, not only of interest for the water field, but crucially here, because such a contribution could obviously, from a conceptual point of view, look much broader than only on water governance. Polycentric governance systems also related to these coordination challenges, because you could say in principle, governance systems related to water are always polycentric because they always have actors coming or also collective, but also individuals from various sectors that need to be engaged in the governance system. But when I talk about polycentric governance system, it could be a design principles, decentralization of authority, but I talk it more when I talk about system in the sense of Ostrom to also that these various polycentric or these various nuclei of authority, the actors are really also connected, that they somehow interact, not fragmented, but polycentric. And that has been promoted as a potentially appropriate design approach or more design approach conducive to really addressing complex challenges due to its flexibility. But how this can be achieved, how does it come into place, that you really have this kind of distributed function structure authority, but still an emergence of rules of networks that connect this system. That's still, I think, a lot of important issues to be explored. And also related to this, really a better understanding of the interplay of governance modes, hierarchies, markets, networks. Quite a few policy instruments could broadly be characterized along these lines. Most modern policies combine these instruments, but how to avoid conflicts and to combine, let's say, more purposefully these kind of instruments in a way that they complement or enhance each other based on their strengths. That's also still a very, would say, very interesting area of research. And then more, we get like in terms of regions, more contributions from Africa and Asia. We have South and Latin America, Europe, but that would be something that would definitely be very welcome. And finally, I think that also really work that combines different approaches to comparative case study analysis. For example, when we have individual in-depth case analysis with more medium N studies where methods like qualitative comparative analysis are used. It's our own experience from projects, it's virtually impossible to capture or like to embrace or integrate the insights from these various analyses in a paper. You have just not sufficient space. And really showing that the value of really combining these different approaches to get more insights and how to generate insights from individual cases. Another area where I think that could be for insights that obviously could be applied to various topics, but also something that I feel from a methodological point of view, very interesting kind of approach. Okay, so far from my side, a little bit on where we are, which kind of books have been published right now, where at least from my perspective, I still both see huge challenges for policy, but also possibilities, challenges from a science and also science to practice implementation point of view for us as a community of governance, water governance scholars. Okay, so I think I could stop now sharing my screen, or probably just stop. Do I actively have to stop, or?
I can also take back presentership.
Okay.
Which I've just done, and now I can move over here and show the slides here. There we go.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon or good evening, good morning, wherever you are. So I'm going to just try to add on to what Claudia has just presented. And in addition to her story on vertical, horizontal, polycentric, systemic approaches, I wanted to add a little story first before I move to my next slide. And that is that I just finished a project called the Global Environment Outlook for United Nations Environment Program, and I was the co-chair of the program. And when we were trying to look for best practices or lessons learned from various governance areas, we found that there was a lot of literature telling us what doesn't work, but very little literature telling us what does work, where, when, why, and under what conditions. And so there is an enormous demand from policymakers for the sort of scholarship that goes deep into an understanding of why things work and why things don't work from an academic perspective and based on empirical evidence. So we move to the next slide. Can you just, we can't see it fully. Is that, yeah. If you move to the next slide, so what we see over here is that one of the areas in which many countries worldwide lack information is how do we deal with the politics and the governance of water budgeting? How much water do we really have in order to allocate in society between humans, between sectors, between users, and this debate about what is the total amount of water that we can use and how do we allocate this. This is a area in which many countries worldwide are struggling, especially countries which have a water shortage. And different countries use different modes, but we really want to learn a little bit more about how this is done. And then what we find often is that many policymakers start to try to allocate water. But the problem is, can you really reallocate water when water is already allocated through a history of property rights or through a history of permits and contracts? So the question over here is, how do we deal with the desire and the need to reallocate water because of climate change, because we have to share water with nature, because we have to share water with other countries, when already we have allocated these waters to different actors in society? And then, of course, the question also arises, in what way are these conflicts between the various actors in society, between the various sectors, between the various needs, how are they actually managed and addressed? And this brings you to the sort of the policy mode of, where do policymakers see the potential for changes, where do they not see potential for changes? And clearly, because the demand for water is going up, because our production and services sector needs so much water, and I'm including here the agricultural production sector, therefore, we are also seeing a huge rise in scholarship and practice on the rights to water and the rights of the river. But in many cases, you'll find that the rights of the river are just the right of one river, not all rivers. So it's a very strange dynamic that is now developing. And the question is, what does this all mean for water governance? So ideas that explore these kinds of issues would be very welcome in our series. If you move to the next slide, then we can look a little bit to the issue of the relationship between water and other environmental challenges. It is clear that climate change will have a massive impact on water use, and Claudia has already brought that topic on the agenda. But climate change will not just have an impact on blue water, it will also have an impact on green and atmospheric water. And what we find is that the bulk of the governance approaches that exist tend to be in the area of blue water. There is some amount of green governance taking place under agricultural policy, but agricultural policy is often divorced from water policy. So it would be very nice to see if we can have some work coming out on green atmospheric water. And then, of course, the issue arises, how does water governance relate to the governance of land? Um, Watersheds are clearly on land. So, how do we manage watersheds, and what does that mean for the governance of water? Now, this may come under integrated water resource management or the nexus approach, but it may also fall under a slightly broader spectrum of, say, the landscape approach. Again, different types of energy require different types of water. We understand that nuclear energy and fossil fuel require a lot of water, whereas solar energy and wind energy require less water. Having said that, we know that in developing countries, there's a lot of dust. And because there's a lot of dust, probably the estimations of water needs are not completely correct. And so basically, this would be an area where we would discuss the relationship, and Claudia has captured that under the idea of nexus. And of course, then the issue arises, how does biodiversity depend on water and the distribution of water and the quality of water, and how do we try to relate water with biodiversity governance. The same is true for desertification governance. Yesterday, in one of my classes, we did an exercise where we looked at all the climate change treaties and we looked at the biodiversity related agreements, the desertification related agreements, and then we looked at the water related agreements to see, do they actually deal with each other? And it's amazing to say that the word water does not appear in the Paris Agreement on climate change. And in the others, it's just mentioned very casually at some point. And ditto, when we talk about the water agreement, the UN Convention on Transboundary Movement, the UN Convention on the Watercourses Convention, there we see that it mentions climatological but does not talk about climate change, even though that convention came into being good 5 years after the climate change convention. So what you see is that we have these divorced bodies of regulation at the global level, which also probably mirrors many of the regulatory processes at national level. And what we would like to see is how all these different issues come together. And then if we move to the next slide, there we can look at the issue of beyond water. And one of the topics here could perhaps be how do we live within water boundaries? There has been some suggestion about water boundaries at the global level, and there are more updates coming on this issue, and it's also going to be linked with boundaries on climate change, on nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, as well as biodiversity. And all these different boundaries mean that there's perhaps less water available for humans. And so there might be a struggle coming out of this between humans and nature. And what is this larger story of how do we live within water boundaries? Another very important issue that we think will become extremely important in the future is what does water mean for development? We know in the climate change arena, people are arguing that we cannot keep on increasing our demand for energy, certainly because much of it comes from fossil fuel. Um, and so therefore, maybe we have to move from augmentation of energy to demand side management of energy. I think we will come up with a similar debate on water, that instead of augmenting water, we probably have to come towards a demand side management of water. And this might bring us back into what is development and how do we redefine our concept of GDP so that it actually enables us to live within our water boundaries. And then, of course, there are all these new problems that we can anticipate in the future. Geoengineering, which requires links with water. There is all this air to water technology that can create massive amounts of atmospheric water grabbing, perhaps. Um, a number of new technologies may create problems, but also we know, at least from the atmospheric water literature, that if, for example, India were to reduce its evaporation by using drip irrigation, sub-Saharan Africa might get less water. So what are these large-scale movements of water going to imply for the way we govern water? So this was just a few more ideas to add to Claudia's explanation of the theoretical starting points that I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for those great insights into. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Yeah. So thanks very much for those insights into to the series and how you would like to see that develop. I don't know if we have any questions in the box. I don't see any there yet. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put your hand up or to drop a question into the box. There's some great ideas there to develop the series further. So I think, you know, if there's no questions coming through now, then certainly we can also handle some questions offline later if people need some time to think about what's being presented here today. Maybe I can ask a question then. because some of the points you put forward are very wide-reaching, and looking at the different policies that are in place. Do you think that edited volumes are also? I mean, up to now we only have monographs, so edited volumes would also be welcome in the series from a collaborative program or project.
I would welcome that, but my only concern is that it should be a very strongly integrated volume, which would be highly coherent. We just don't want a whole bunch of chapters stitched together.
No, indeed.
I totally agree on that, because if there would be a kind of overarching concept where the various, perhaps have various case studies, or it definitely should have a strong conceptual overarching guidance, that it really makes that the chapters make a whole story rather than being a patchwork. Because that it should be more than a special issue. That's the difference from a book. It should really be something.
Yeah, and a link throughout the whole the book, bringing everything together.
And I think for the strength of the series, it's really important that the book has a shelf life of at least 10 years. So it would be really important if our authors would think about the future and try to sort of plan the book in such a way that it's not only relevant for today or only solving yesterday's problems.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Margaret, we've also we've received some questions in the meantime. I have one question here. What is the cost for authors?
Okay, so that's a question for me, I think.
Yeah.
There's actually no cost involved when publishing with Springer. Yeah, unless you wanted to publish open access, which of course does involve a fee, but for just publishing a monograph or an edited contributed volume, there are no costs involved.
Another question leading on from that. So if someone has an idea for a book, you want to be the first point of contact, right, Margaret?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. You can send I can act as the centre point. Proposals can be forwarded to me, and then I will send them on to Claudia and Joyeeta for their evaluation.
We've received one rather concrete idea for a potential topic, but the same person has also asked another question. Is it possible to include other topics that kind of cover also more ecological bases, water quality and quantity, headwaters, small streams, river characterization, and biological issues related to that?
So the main thing I think from my perspective is that we welcome any elements of natural science are taken into account, but it should be a governance. It should be about how we govern the whole process. And of course, all these elements are important. Claudia, don't you agree?
Yeah, I would also say a purely study of why certain species survive under certain conditions in certain rivers probably would be much too ecological. But if you say kind of what could be kind of monitoring approaches to help us to assess the state of a river. So if it's connected in terms of to governance issues, I think it's definitely connection between ecological ecosystem or water quality and governance aspects would be very welcome. But the connection should be explicit.
I hope that answers all the questions so far. Any more?
Yeah, I think if someone really has a question whether like this one, does it really fit into this overarching book series? I guess one could also, before submitting a formal proposal, send about a half page where you have a first idea and say, all right, is this something that's really, before I really write the full proposal, is it something that might fit into it? And then we can get a first feedback. That's, I think, should be possible.
There's been one more question. Sorry, Margaret.
Go ahead.
One more question. What is the main interest in atmospheric water? And a further question, whether the biggest interest is ways of capturing it.
So the thing is that both up till now, the bulk of the the thought process in water governance has focused on surface water, much less on groundwater. The groundwater is increasingly getting more interest, much less on green water, and even less on atmospheric water. If you look at atmospheric water, we're really talking about atmospheric, not only just water vapor, but atmospheric rivers that you can actually see through remote sensing technologies used by NASA, etc. So, you know, there's a lot of water in the air. And nowadays, for example, if you watch CNN, you will see that there are advertisements regularly on air to water technology. And in many parts of the world, these air to water technologies are being actively developed. But such a technology can be, you know, a hardware type of technology, but it can also just simply be a great green wall. And a great green wall will also absorb and use much more water, or have a greater relationship with both green water and atmospheric water. And this can change the availability of water for others. So there are areas in some parts of the world where um, villagers try to prevent the clouds from going from their village to the next village, because if it goes across, then they don't get the rainfall. So, you know, there's a lot of activity taking place in this particular arena. So it's an exciting new frontier of research, and I think we should not react to the technologies. We should preempt with our scholarship the kinds of negative impacts these approaches may have.
But just to add, you mentioned mainly technologies, but what has been discussed already since some time, this whole land use changes. Obviously, in the Amazon, Brazil is just a big country. It's managing its own it's generating its own problems. Because you just mentioned this huge river in atmospheric water that is driven by the Amazon, and they generate, for example, obviously now these droughts in the Pantanal. That's the new insights from Nature Science very much show the evidence of these linkages. And if this would be a kind of cross-nation event, though you change, you really have a big land use changes in one country where you really entirely change precipitation patterns in another one, that's a big issue. That also the question is how could or should we govern that? That's, I think, another aspect of what I see on this atmospheric water.
Been two very specific questions. I've answered those directly in the chat box with a reference that if you do have an idea for a title, a concrete idea already, maybe even just a couple of broad topics as well, please do drop my colleague Margaret a line, and she'll help guide you with the further process.
Okay. I actually can't see if there are any questions in the question box, so sorry about that. So
no worries.
I've
covered all of them. I've read all the ones aloud, and there's two that a big one just came in.
Okay.
Okay. A heartfelt thanks to the professors for sharing these key points for further study. And a question for Claudia. Are you working in any water governance case studies in Latin America? And if so, if you could provide any insights on that, or about the region in general.
I can't provide any insights on that. I'm not working myself. We don't have research there. I'm participating in or exchanges a team that has some comparative insights in Uruguay, Argentina, and Brazil. So that's I'm more here participating as supporter of the project rather than do research myself. More recently, we have moved and started to do more work in Costa Rica, which I find as a country fascinating, not only from the water perspective. Obviously, it's a great country. We've just been there, but also from the whole social dynamics. So what I find so interesting there is a lot of bottom-up initiatives that really kind of self-organization that develop and when they deal with a couple of water issues, water scarcity, but also coastal fisheries and other issues. So that's I found very interesting if you contrast this to surrounding countries. So that's a bit more on that issue. But overarching, obviously, in these countries, but that's not only in Latin and South America, is the problem of also institutional capacity. But this really thriving of developing more of the informal aspects and of bottom-up initiatives that we see in Costa Rica, we'll do more research on that. I find very interesting, and I guess you find this to some extent as well in other Latin American countries. I'm sure if Joyeeta has more research done in this region.
No, mostly no, not. But I know that Marco Herbert's book in this series did cover Chile and Argentina in disaster risk management. So some of our series are covering areas in Latin America. And I think one that is going to come out quite soon on groundwater governance will also cover Costa Rica in more detail.
Thanks for answering that. I think we have one question here from someone who joined perhaps a little later, asking if monitoring of groundwater and monitoring of groundwater using remote sensing techniques is also interesting.
Only if it is a governance story,
yeah.
and not if it's a technological story. So yes, how can monitoring and remote sensing help us better govern, and what are the possibilities in terms of how to use it, who can afford it, who benefits, who loses? Those kinds of questions are really important from a social science perspective.
Yeah, and I would also say there's now so much opportunities for these kind of new technologies, and some books or some work that really thinks not only about from this technology perspective, but connects these technology perspectives with the challenges of how it can, what are the kind of conditions that are required from the governance perspective to really make these technologies to be really beneficial for really improving governance. So connecting these two aspects, I think that would be very, very, very very worthwhile, because more and more of these technologies are developed, and they're looking at the connection. Because having technology itself is by no means sufficient to really also make or support that it will be used in a way that it will improve water governance and management.
That was the last of the questions.
Okay, well, that's amazingly on time, actually. Okay, there's no more questions. As we said earlier, thank you very much to everyone who joined us today. If you want any more information, or if you have any more questions after this session, please feel free to contact me directly, and or of course the series editors if you have any direct questions for them. Thanks to both Claudia and Joyeeta today for joining us, and it's been a pleasure to meet you and to hear your ideas and thoughts on the series. And I apologize again to everyone for the technical difficulties at the beginning of the session, but I hope that didn't detract from the content too much. So thanks again to everybody, and bye for now.
Yeah, and we look forward to all the proposals that will now come in. Okay. Bye.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.